The purpose of this video is to help restore racial unity among people in the United States and across the world, but mainly in the United States. And yet, I do not agree with the mainstream narrative about race in America today. There is a narrative coming mostly from the left, which, by the way, is my lifelong position. I'm a pretty firm lefty, meaning it is just my nature to see the world from that position. It doesn't mean I think people who see it differently are bad, wrong, or crazy. It just means I have my particular view, and I think it's important for me to hear other people's views so that we can balance each other. Again, unity is what we're talking about right there. This video is about racial unity, and yet I do not agree with the philosophy being taught by today's social activists. And that breaks a lot of people's brains, because what's being taught right now is you're either for me or you're against me. Those are the only two positions a person can be in. You either agree with me or you're my enemy. You're on the other side. You're an extremist, a hater. You're crazy, bad, or stupid, or all three. So that way of seeing people, especially in regards to race, is not an accurate way of seeing what's happening. And that's what I want to talk about. That kind of anti-racism is not real anti-racism. And I can explain exactly why. And that's what I'm going to do a little bit in this video. Again, my intention is to help heal and restore racial unity among people. As the title says, I am an old school social justice warrior, you could say. It's a cringy term, but you know, I kind of have to apply it to myself. It's kind of true. It was 30 years ago when I was in my early 20s that I started learning about racism, and not just learning about it intellectually, but attending 6-week courses and weekend workshops where I would not just learn about racist conditioning that society hits people with, I would look inside of myself to find my own racist conditioning. And I worked on myself. It was like a therapeutic work designed to help us release and heal the psychological wounds of racism. And you might think that sounds weird, that a white male could be wounded by racism, but I would say that the philosophy of racism is for white people. It's not for black people originally. And that's what I'm going to talk about. It's about messing with the head of white people so that we think black people are a separate species that's inferior to us. That's what was taught. Okay, so let me dig in a little bit and see if you can resist the urge to make it a false dilemma that I'm either against you or I'm 100% in agreement with me, and there's no middle ground. See if you can resist that logical fallacy. The false dilemma logical fallacy is another name for it. A polarized viewpoint, a polarized mind is another name for that. It is literally called also the black or white logical fallacy. Lots of names for it, but they all are about us being scared, where we feel like we're unsafe, and so we have to identify who's a friend, who's an enemy. Which one? Is he going to hurt me or help me? Reality isn't always that simple. It's not always that black or white. Sometimes we have a good person who's confused, who's trying to do the right thing, but they're accidentally doing something that's hurting us, but they're also helping us at the same time. It can be really complex, right? So see if you can hear me. See if you can resist the urge to try to categorize me into one of those two positions as fast as you can. If you do that, you will miss what I'm actually saying. And what I'm actually saying in this video is it's so hopeful. It's so filled with heart. And humanness and hope for all of us. It's actually has love in it instead of division and polarization, it has unity in it. The good news is that unity is the reality, and people have to work very hard to get us to fracture and disunify. And they are working hard at it, and it is working because we're letting it. So anyway, let me jump in. Hundreds of years ago in the American South, white slave owners started a social engineering campaign. You could call it a marketing campaign. It was a misinformation campaign to change the minds of white people. They began to teach a philosophy of racism against black slaves, against all black people. They began teaching that black people were a separate species. This is not true. Okay. They're the same species. They have the same psychology. To become a psychologist, you don't learn a black psychology. To become a doctor, you don't have to learn a black physiology. There are, some susceptibilities to disease that are different, but they're very small. It has nothing to do with being a different species. Yes, the cultural conditioning can be wildly different, and that affects us psychologically in different ways, but our core psychology is the same. Just like our core physiology is exactly the same. We're the same species. I feel like I need to emphasize that. White people were taught by white slave owners that black people were a different species and were inferior, and therefore it was fine to keep them enslaved. Many white people, unfortunately, accepted this doctrine that was being pushed on them because white people, just like all human beings of the same species, are very susceptible to idiotic ideas. We fall for it. We are able to be manipulated. It's really not that difficult. Social engineers, the rulers of the masses, they figured this out thousands of years ago, how to manipulate people into doing what they want. It's a very simple recipe. You tell them something over and over and over. In the beginning, they won't accept it because if it's fake, if it's a lie, it'll be obvious at first, but you just keep repeating that. And then you do something to scare them. And when you scare them, they're going to go into fight or flight thinking. That is that same kind of polarized thinking. Are you an enemy or are you a friend? Are you going to hurt me? Or are you going to help me? There's only these two options that I need to figure out right now. I don't need to figure out complexity and nuance. I just need to know whether you're about to stab me with that sword or whether you're going to protect me with it. So you scare them, put them into fight or flight mode. Then you repeat over and over that the problem, the thing that's scaring them, is this polarized narrative of good, bad. You present that to them, which is already the way that their mind is thinking because they're really scared. And then you present to them a polarized, black or white solution. And if you do that, you scare them, you freak them out, and then you offer them this solution that has that black or white thinking built into it. A lot of people are going to leap for it. They're going to grab onto it. They're going to latch on to what you're selling them, and then you get to take them wherever you want to go. You can lead them through this kind of manipulation of this instinctual primate survival instinct to go into fight or flight and try to only see things in stark terms of friend, enemy. That's what white slave owners did. They worked hard at it. They organized. They promoted this material in newspapers, in town hall meetings, and so on. They convinced a lot of people. Now, let's ask ourselves a really important question. Why did they do this? Why did white slave owners need to enact a social engineering program to teach white people racism? The answer is really simple, and it's because racism didn't come naturally to white people, just like it doesn't come naturally to any color of people. What comes naturally to people is to see other people as just like them. And that's what was going on in the Old South. You had a lot of white people who were sympathetic to the plight of black slaves, especially since there was a system of debt slavery that white people were put into, where if you owed somebody money, say you needed to buy a ticket to come to North America on a ship, and you borrowed that money, then you would become basically an indentured servant to that person until you could work off your debt. You were in effect kind of like their slave until you'd finished paying off your debt, and then you could win your freedom that way. But as you might expect, that system was abused and exploited, and you had white debtors who were being mistreated and who could never work off their debt, and so on. This system of exploitation was worse for black slaves, but it was also affecting other groups of people who weren't black, and naturally they were sympathetic to each other. You had white debt slaves who would run away with black slaves. They would help each other. You would have lots of white people advocating for the end of slavery in the Old South. You would have white people helping slaves escape. The Underground Railroad, they called it. There was a network of white people helping slaves to escape in the Old South. Okay, it wasn't all just people in the North. They were all unracist and everyone in the South was racist. No, slavery was never popular. And one of the reasons why is because most of these white people had come from Europe. They'd been brought up with the principles of what is called the European Enlightenment, which had started like in the 1600s, that taught people that everyone had their own human dignity and that everyone deserved to be the master of their own destiny and to have individual liberty and freedom. Those were core principles of the European Enlightenment. And all of these white people, or almost all of them, had come from Europe and had been brought up around those ideas. So slavery was this global phenomenon at the time, yet among Europeans from that European Enlightenment philosophy, they weren't at ease with it. Some of them obviously were at ease with it and were profiting on it and were confused enough to support it and back it and do horrible things. But that's not the whole story, okay? Unfortunately, we can't just simplify everything into black or white. All the white people were racist. All the black people were poor victims. There were black slave owners also. There were black people who owned slaves. Not a lot, but they existed. The slaves coming from Africa were being sold by black people in Africa. Even matriarchal tribes in Africa, tribes led by black women, even they had slaves and profited off the slave system. So it's not a black or white thing. We're being taught now it's black or white. And that makes everything so easy, right? It destroys our unity, but it makes it everything easy to understand. White people bad and racist, black people poor victims. No, here's a different story. We're all the same species with the same psychology and the same blood and heart. We've been separated, especially by these white slave owners promoting a philosophy of racism to separate us, to break apart our bond, to get white people to stop sympathizing with black people, to get white people, when they saw a black person, to stop thinking, oh, here's a brother or sister of mine who has this different kind of appearance. No, instead, it seems like that's a different species, inferior to me. They had to work really hard to break us apart. And they did it so that white people wouldn't end slavery. Do you know what happened? white people ended slavery anyway. A bunch of white dudes in Washington, D.C. declared war against slavery. Really, it was a war against that social engineering program, teaching whites that it was okay to enslave people on a psychological level, on a core level. That's what the war was really against. It was against that ideology. I really want to drive home this point. We're being taught right now that all white people are racist. I understand, as a 30 plus year social justice student who works on himself, I understand the idea behind calling all white people racist. There is a facet of truth if you're defining racism a certain way, and if you're including all the context, there is a way that is true. But we're not being taught that full picture. That idea, all white people are racist in America, is being used as a weapon, not as a tool to enlighten white people and make them more self-aware of the unconscious social conditioning they've received around race so that they can let it go and choose something differently. It's not being used that way. Some people are trying to use it that way, but mostly what I see is it's being used as a weapon to attack and subjugate and shame and ridicule white people. And what you're doing there is you're actually hurting the cause of racial unity. You are ignoring the reality, which anyone can look this up, that white people were also lynched in the South. White people also had crosses burned in their front yard. White people sacrificed their careers, their reputations to help black people. White people gave up their lives to try to help black people and to end slavery, which they succeeded at before most of the world. That's not a defense against the horrific things that white people did. It's the rest of the story. And the rest of the story, my friends, is important. If you leave that part of the story out, you're not telling the truth. What you're doing is you're editing out certain information to push one idea, one narrative, but that's not the whole truth. Do you know why in a courtroom, when someone's going to testify, they make that person swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? It's because those three things, it's not an accident. It's not just poetry. It's because you can tell the truth while still lying. The way to tell the truth while still lying is to not tell the whole truth, or to tell truth but also mixed in with falsehood. That's why they say to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. There's a really important reason there, because right now we're being told by this anti-racist movement, we're being told truths, but we're not being told the whole truth, and we're not being told nothing but the truth. We're getting lies mixed in, and we're getting truths left out. And that's being done to create a narrative that breaks our unity. It makes black people feel more alone, more isolated, more unsafe than they really are. And it makes white people feel more alone and more unsafe than we really are. It's about breaking our unity, because we were actually doing pretty good. We had made a shit ton of progress. We'd made so much progress that Martin Luther King decided to stop putting all of his efforts into fighting against racism. Once he won equal rights for black people in America back in the 60s, almost 60 years ago, he looked around at the landscape of America and realized that racism was not the biggest thing holding black people down anymore. Poverty was the biggest thing. And he also said, it's not just holding down black people, it's holding down everybody. It's holding down white people. There are more impoverished white people in America, Martin Luther King said, accurately, than any other group. And so if he was going to fight against poverty for black people, he needed to fight against poverty for white people too, and against poverty for all people. What he was really fighting against there, of course, is called not racism or sexism or homophobia, it's classism. Classism, another word for it, is economic disparity, enforced economic disparity, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Guys, that's what's been happening. For the last decade, the top 1% wealthiest people have been growing vastly wealthier, while most Americans are growing poorer and poorer and more desperate. Most Americans can't afford health care, not just for blacks, but for whites also. Martin Luther King began fighting against poverty, classism, and that's when he was killed. So I think that's important, because I don't think that was an accident. Really, it's the same thing happened to Malcolm X. When he was teaching hatred of whitey, when he was this divisive character, no one tried to kill him. But when he went to Mecca and he had a religious experience and he realized the unity of all people, and he came back to America and started preaching unity of all people, that's when someone shot him. Do you know why I think that is? It's because preaching unity, like I'm doing in this video, is the most dangerous thing for any power structure, where you've got a tiny minority of people who have the majority of the wealth and they're feeding off of the masses. Those tiny minority of people will try to engineer society so that the masses are divided and fighting each other, so that there's tension and distrust with each other. As long as that's there, you can lead them wherever you want them to go. You just keep presenting this misinformation to them, this framework of polarization and division, keep scaring them, make them desperate, keep scapegoating this group and that group, and they'll go wherever you want them to. That's what's happening right now, guys, with this movement that claims to be an anti-racist movement. This movement goes by many names. A common one that some people find insulting is the woke movement. Some people call it identity politics, cancel culture. Used to be called call-out culture, because these were the people calling out everybody for being racist and sexist and all that stuff. Some people claim that this new movement is communism or Marxism, and that's not really true. Communism was focused on classism. It was focused on economic disparity and fixing that, getting rid of that tiny 1% and spreading that wealth out to all people and giving everyone equal power, equal financial power. They were very focused on money, but this new movement, some people call it identity Marxism, because it's not focused on money hardly at all. You rarely hear people in this movement talking about economic disparity for all people, classism. They're so super focused on sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia. So it's all about, in what way can we divide all the struggling Americans who are not in this wealthiest class? How can we get them to be divided? Because things were starting to go, the tensions were fading. Polls in the 90s, when they asked black kids in the 90s, was racism a major factor holding them back in their lives? Most of them said no. We were getting rid of all that, right? We were actually leading the world. We were an example of a diverse society that was healing from really horrible racist past. And let's make no mistake, man, it was really bad in the past. But this new movement doesn't acknowledge what's really happening to most people, is that most of our biggest issues are around money, black or white. Most of our biggest problem right now is that we live in fear of making rent and paying the bills every month. We're living paycheck to paycheck, if we're even able to do that. That's the biggest problem affecting most people in America. But this social justice movement, it remains mum about classism, economic disparity. And it's just focused on suddenly all white people are racist in America and everything is horrific related to that. Meanwhile, we've got people of color from Asia and Africa and South of our border risking their lives to move here. They want to be here. Apparently, they didn't get the memo that they're going to be horrifically oppressed when they arrive. They're looking at us going, shit, that's the promised land. But we're repeating this story over and over and over about how horrible it is here. And it's just breaking the racial unity that was getting tighter and tighter before this movement started. This movement isn't really communism. The best term I've heard for it is it's based on critical theory, which is sort of like a communism, but that doesn't focus on the money. It focuses on these other subgroupings of identity, race, gender, and so on. So one of the big points here is that just like race and racism was used to divide us way back in the slavery days, just like white slave owners used that racist ideology to divide us apart, so is the new racist ideology being used to divide us apart. The masters of society right now, the social engineers who are trying to keep us in a state of fear and disunity, they know that they couldn't use the old racist ideology to break us apart. We'd gotten past that. Society, we were never going to buy that right now. They couldn't teach us that, again, that black people are inferior and a separate species and all that. No one was going to believe that. They had to come up with a new racist ideology that breaks us apart. And that's what we've got here with the critical theory movement, the woke movement. It's very clever. It poses as an anti-racist movement, even as it just takes a bat and breaks apart the racial unity that's been slowly growing and getting better. It's not just insulting to white people to say that all white people are racist, to ignore all the sacrifices and struggles of white people to end slavery and to end racism, to work with people of color to end those things. In fact, it's still going on today. You know, we got millions of white people still doing that. I think they're just doing it wrong. They still think they're doing that, but they're actually being used by this clever program that poses as anti-racism, but really promotes racism. It's a new racism. They flipped the script. The way you can tell is that it's breaking unity. That's one way you can tell. There's another really important way you can tell that their narrative is not in alignment with what sociological data tells us about what's actually happening in America. Any one of us can go do basic internet research and find out about race in America. Who is the highest income ethnic group in America today? Who is the most well-educated? The ones who make the most money, who get the best health care, who live the longest, and so on. It's not white people anymore. It's not males either. The highest paid demographic, according to race and gender in the United States, is Asian female. Females across the board are getting higher education at a higher rate now than men. A lot of these narratives that we have about race that they're based in the past, they're outdated. Things have changed, guys. Things change, life is change. The universe is constantly changing. You can have an organization that used to be wholesome and good that becomes infiltrated and corrupted and starts doing bad things. You can have a bad organization that gets reformed and starts doing good things. It can happen to people. It can happen to movements. It can happen to political parties. Everything changes. There's always going to be a group of selfish people who try to take advantage of whatever blind spots we have. If people trust this organization, then they'll try to infiltrate that organization and then use that trust to enrich themselves. And by the time the trust is broken, people realize finally what's happening and the trust goes away. That's fine. They've already made a fortune, and now they move on to the next thing. Of course, they're always pivoting and adapting. That's what big business does. It adapts to constantly changing economic environments. That's what classism does. That's what the masters of society do. They pivot, they restructure, they rearrange, they exploit our weaknesses to sell us something and to get our money and to take control. I'm going to wrap it up here, but I want to throw a few more weird ideas at you. Racism against black people was not developed to control black people. They used guns and whips and torture and chains to control black people back in the Old South. Racist ideology was used to control white people. It was to confuse white people into believing and supporting an inhumane system. White people were the primary targets of this racist ideology. It was a social engineering campaign to mess us up in the head. And it worked, but it didn't work on everybody. And it's super important. The majority of people, it didn't work on. Otherwise, we would still have slavery today. Otherwise, Europe and the United States wouldn't have been the primary force banning slavery all across the rest of the world. And we weren't. It was European and North American culture that made slavery illegal in Asia, Africa, and South America. Please understand, I'm not denying or using that as a defense against anything horrible that white people did or white culture did. We need to look at that stuff. We need to look at everything. Every little harm caused by white people needs to be acknowledged and then healed and moved past. Every positive thing white people have done needs to be acknowledged. Same with every other group of people. Same with every economic class of people. That's how you heal. You heal by looking at the whole picture, not little bits and pieces that serve somebody. This racist ideology was really about slave owners making more money. They wanted to teach that to people so that they wouldn't end slavery, so that they could keep making money. Slavery was about making money. Racism was about making money. And that means racism was there to serve classism. And racist ideology is still being used today to serve classism. What I'm saying to you in this video, they don't want you to know about this. They don't want you to think this deeply about it. They don't want you to come out of us versus them thinking, false dilemma, good, bad thinking. They don't want you to come out of that so that you can see all the puppet strings that I'm pointing out to you here. They're using this ideology to divide us and conquer us and control us. And they have to work super hard because otherwise it would all fall apart so quickly. If they weren't constantly pumping it in to our brains, it would just fall apart almost immediately. Just like when you if you stop maintaining a road, within a few years, there's trees growing right out of the middle of it. That natural order of humanness is like this tidal wave that they have to keep pushing against and to keep it from just flooding in and restoring unity between us. That's why what I'm saying is so dangerous to them. I've been so scared to say this, but finally getting around to it, and I'm going to keep saying it. Just like so many white people were fooled back then, so many white people are being fooled today. So many black people are being fooled by this ideology. Unity is the only way to ensure we're not being fooled. Another word for unity is just love. Loving each other is the fastest way back to reality. Loving not just the ones who make us feel good, who agree with us. Those are the easy ones. Those aren't the ones that we're disunified with. We have to be willing to start letting everyone back in our heart, including the puppet masters at the top. They're just wounded little puppies also. That's a whole nother video. I could go into it. They've been confused and wounded also into becoming the kind of people who do what they're doing. we have an opportunity as a species to bring us all together in a way that's never happened before. And that's what I'm into. That's what I'm going to try to do. Join me. I'll close by saying if I'm wrong about something, point it out. That's an ad hominem attack that I welcome. If you want to call me stupid, please do. You're right. I am stupid about a lot of things. But my heart's in the right place here, and I have studied this for over 30 years. So keep that in mind too. I studied it because I care about it.